Boulder, Colorado, was blanketed in quiet snow on the night of December 25, 1996. Inside the Grand Ramsey home on 15th Street, Christmas had come and gone in a whirl of festivity, wrapped gifts, and family tradition. 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey, a child beauty queen with blonde curls and sparkling eyes, had just enjoyed an evening filled with joy, opening presents, playing with her older brother Burke, and visiting neighbors. By all accounts, the night had ended peacefully, but by morning that illusion would be shattered. At approximately 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey dialed 911 in a panic. She reported that her daughter was missing and that she had found a ransom note demanding $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. The note, which she claimed to have discovered on the staircase, was unusually long, nearly 3 pages, and written with a dramatic, almost theatrical tone. It instructed the Ramseys not to contact police and claimed that JonBenét would be beheaded if they did. Despite the warning, Patsy's instincts overrode the letter's threats. Police arrived at the Ramsey residence within minutes, but from the moment authorities stepped through the door, critical mistakes began to unfold. The house was not sealed off. Friends and family were allowed to enter, contaminating the crime scene. Officers assumed this was a kidnapping and did not initially treat the home as a potential homicide scene. JonBenét's body was found hours later by her father, John Ramsey, in a little-used basement room. She was lying on the floor, wrapped in a white blanket, with her wrists bound, mouth covered in duct tape, and a garrote made from a paintbrush handle around her neck. The discovery of her body inside the home, despite an alleged kidnapping, instantly shifted the case from abduction to homicide. The autopsy would later reveal that JonBenét died from a combination of strangulation and a skull fracture. There were also signs of a possible sexual assault. The garrote used in the strangulation had been fashioned from items inside the house, suggesting that the killer had spent time within the home or had access to it. The ransom note became a focal point for investigators. It was written on a pad of paper from the Ramsey home using one of Patsy's Sharpie pens. The phrasing was unusual, even bizarre, including lines seemingly lifted from popular action movies like Speed and Dirty Harry. The demand for $118,000, nearly the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, seemed too specific to be coincidence. Handwriting experts were brought in to analyze the note. While John Ramsey was ruled out as the author, opinions about Patsy's involvement varied. Some experts said the letter bore similarities to her writing, but none could conclusively state she had written it. As news of JonBenét's death spread, the media descended on Boulder. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, and television broadcasts looped footage of JonBenét's pageant performances, dressed in sequins, singing, twirling, smiling. The American public was captivated, and soon, the case transcended the crime itself. It became a cultural event, an unsolved murder that would be dissected for decades. In the following days, suspicion grew in multiple directions. Police began to consider everyone close to the family, including the Ramseys themselves. But they also faced pressure to find leads quickly. Tips poured in, theories flourished, and the nation watched with bated breath. As the hours ticked by on December 26, 1996, the scene inside the Ramsey home became a confusing blur of activity. Friends arrived to support the family. Officers moved from room to room, but without a clear protocol for a potential homicide, vital evidence was overlooked or outright destroyed. From the start, the crime scene was compromised. The 15-room home wasn't secured, and family friends walked freely through its halls, unknowingly disturbing key areas. Police allowed John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house unsupervised, a decision that would soon haunt investigators. It was during this search that John discovered JonBenét's lifeless body in the basement. He picked her up and carried her upstairs, removing tape from her mouth and attempting to cover her. While understandable in the context of a grieving father's reaction, these actions altered the original position of the body and introduced further contamination. Several errors followed. Officers failed to secure or thoroughly document the basement. Photographs of the scene were incomplete. Potential fingerprints were smudged or lost. The 911 call, a critical piece of evidence, wasn't analyzed thoroughly until years later. Even then, some investigators claimed additional voices were audible in the background, raising questions about who was present during the call. The ransom note, found at the foot of the staircase, became both a physical clue and a psychological puzzle. It was unusually long for a kidnapping note and contained references to pop culture, including lines from action movies. Investigators were puzzled by its theatrical tone and its demand of exactly $118,000, the same as John Ramsey's recent bonus. The note was written with materials from inside the home, suggesting the author was not only familiar with the layout but had time to compose the message without fear of being caught. Detectives were split on its origin. Some believed it was a deliberate misdirection, possibly written after JonBenét had already been killed. Others thought it pointed to an outsider familiar enough with the family to know about John's finances. Meanwhile, outside the house, the media storm intensified. News helicopters flew overhead. Reporters camped out on neighbors' lawns. Rumors leaked from within the police department to the press, many of which later proved to be false or misleading. Back inside, forensics teams found additional troubling clues. Broken glass near a basement window, a suitcase placed beneath it, and a scuff mark on the wall, details that seemed to support the theory of a possible break-in. But those clues, too, were questioned. Were they signs of a staged entry, or the real path the killer used to enter and exit unnoticed? The autopsy findings added to the mystery. JonBenét had suffered a massive blow to the head and was then strangled. Some experts believed the head injury occurred first, possibly by accident, and the strangulation was staged afterward to suggest a more sadistic crime. Others argued the opposite. Then there were the fibers, traces of Patsy's clothing allegedly found on the duct tape and in the basement. While circumstantial, these clues raised eyebrows. Were they simply the result of a shared living space, or evidence of direct involvement? As investigators tried to make sense of the fractured puzzle before them, two theories began to form, one pointing to an intruder and another focusing on the family. Each had its own set of supporting evidence, but neither could fully explain all the inconsistencies. The case, from the very beginning, was plagued by missteps, both accidental and systemic. The result was a muddled investigation, where hard evidence was scarce, and theories flourished in the absence of clarity. As suspicion turned inward, the media frenzy began painting the Ramseys not just as grieving parents, but as potential suspects. In a case with no clear intruder and a crime scene riddled with ambiguity, law enforcement began to focus on the people closest to JonBenét, her own family. From early on, police quietly suspected that either Patsy or John Ramsey, or both, were involved in their daughter's death. A widely accepted theory among some detectives was that JonBenét may have been accidentally killed during a moment of rage or panic, and that the ransom note and staging were a cover-up. One version of this theory proposed that Patsy, in a fit of frustration, struck JonBenét, causing the fatal skull fracture. In this scenario, the garrote and ransom note were part of a hasty plan to mislead investigators. The evidence that fueled this suspicion was largely circumstantial. Patsy had reportedly worn the same clothing on the morning of December 26th that she had worn the night before, which some found suspicious. The fibers from her clothing were allegedly found on the duct tape and the blanket wrapped around JonBenét. However, critics of this theory pointed out that the family lived in the same house. It was not unreasonable for those fibers to be present throughout. Adding to the intrigue was JonBenét's older brother, Burke Ramsey. 9 years old at the time, Burke was initially interviewed by social workers and later in 1998 gave a more formal police interview. Some theorists speculated that Burke may have struck his sister in anger or during play, and the parents then staged the scene to protect him. However, there has never been physical evidence to support this theory, and law enforcement did not officially name him a suspect. The Ramseys vehemently denied any involvement. They hired high-profile attorneys and conducted their own investigations, even bringing in private detectives and media consultants. Some saw this as a sign of guilt, others as the actions of parents desperate to protect themselves in a hostile media storm. John and Patsy Ramsey appeared on multiple national television interviews, most notably with CNN and Barbara Walters. During these appearances, they remained composed but defensive, insisting on their innocence and criticizing the Boulder Police Department for their tunnel vision. They accused authorities of focusing solely on them and ignoring the possibility of an outside intruder. By 1999, a Boulder County grand jury reviewed the evidence in the case. In a shocking twist, the jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. However, the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, declined to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence to move forward with prosecution. This decision remained sealed until it was made public more than a decade later, reigniting debate about whether justice had been denied or wisely deferred. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some believed the Ramseys were victims of character assassination, unfairly targeted because of their wealth and public image. Others were convinced that the bizarre circumstances surrounding the case pointed directly to the family. Documentaries, books, and television specials explored both sides, often framing the Ramseys as either cunning manipulators or devastated parents caught in a tragic nightmare. The cloud of suspicion followed the Ramseys for years. Patsy Ramsey passed away from ovarian cancer in 2006, still publicly maintaining her innocence. In 2008, Boulder authorities issued a formal apology to the family, stating that newly tested DNA evidence found on JonBenét's clothing did not match any family member and suggesting an unknown male intruder may have been responsible. Even with that exoneration, the question lingered in the minds of many. If not the Ramseys, then who? As suspicion began to shift away from the Ramsey family, a new theory gained momentum, the intruder theory. Could someone have entered the house late on Christmas night or early the next morning and committed the crime without the Ramseys knowing? The idea wasn't new, but it hadn't been fully explored in the early days of the investigation. Proponents of the intruder theory pointed to several pieces of evidence suggesting forced or covert entry. The broken basement window, originally noticed by John Ramsey, was a focal point. He claimed to have broken the window himself weeks earlier after being locked out. However, spiderwebs around the frame and undisturbed debris on the window well suggested the area hadn't been recently used. Still, some believed it remained a viable entry point. The suitcase found beneath the window added to the suspicion. Investigators speculated it may have been placed there to help someone climb out. Inside the suitcase were a blanket and a child's Dr. Seuss book, both possibly moved by the killer or staged. DNA found on the suitcase was unidentified. Additionally, DNA found on JonBenét's underwear and the waistband of her long johns did not match any family member. This critical evidence led to renewed support for the intruder theory in the 2000s. Some experts argued that the DNA could belong to the killer and indicated that someone outside the family was responsible. Another clue: a neighbor reported hearing a scream around midnight, followed by silence. A former housekeeper told police the Ramseys had left doors unlocked and allowed service people in freely, increasing the possibility that someone with inside knowledge could have entered without force. Several persons of interest emerged over the years. One was Gary Oliva, a known sex offender who lived in Boulder and reportedly carried a photo of JonBenét in his backpack when arrested years later. Others included former housekeepers, a local Santa impersonator, and even online confession hoaxers. None of them were ever charged. Perhaps the most notorious suspect was John Mark Carr, a schoolteacher arrested in Thailand in 2006 after confessing to the murder. Carr claimed he was with JonBenét when she died and described intimate details of the case. But his DNA didn't match the samples found at the scene, and his story quickly unraveled under scrutiny. He was released without charges. The Boulder Police Department, criticized for focusing too heavily on the family, began re-examining evidence in the early 2000s. Advances in DNA testing opened new possibilities. Partial male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing was sent for further analysis, though no matches have surfaced in national databases. Calls to submit the sample for genealogical testing, similar to techniques that caught the Golden State Killer, have been made, but so far no breakthrough has occurred. Despite the compelling aspects of the intruder theory, skeptics remain. Some forensic experts argue the DNA could be from contaminated factory handling of the underwear. Others question the logistics. How could an intruder have spent enough time inside the home to write a lengthy ransom note and stage the scene without being noticed? Still, the intruder theory remains the most credible alternative to family involvement. It's been embraced by many independent investigators, journalists, and forensic experts who believe the Ramseys were falsely accused. In the absence of conclusive evidence, however, the truth remains elusive. The intruder theory offers a plausible path, but without a named suspect or verified match to the DNA, it remains just that, a theory. More than 25 years after her death, JonBenét Ramsey's case is still open, still active, and still cold. Whether the killer was a family member, a trusted friend, or a stranger who slipped into the shadows of that grand home, the answer continues to evade justice. From the moment JonBenét Ramsey's death was reported, the media took hold of the story with relentless intensity. Her name became a household fixture not only because of the tragedy but because of the spectacle it created. This wasn't just a crime story, it was a cultural obsession, and it shaped the investigation in ways that may have hindered the pursuit of justice. Early media coverage emphasized JonBenét's participation in beauty pageants. Footage of the 6-year-old dressed in glittery costumes and performing on stage became the face of the case, stirring both fascination and controversy. Critics argued the pageant imagery sensationalized the child's image, shifting focus away from the crime itself and onto broader cultural debates about parenting and exploitation. As law enforcement worked behind closed doors, the press filled the silence with speculation. News outlets, both local and national, scrambled for exclusives, often running unverified rumors as breaking developments. Leaks from inside the police department and DA's office made their way to the headlines. Every detail, no matter how minor, was amplified. The Ramseys became public figures almost overnight. Their interviews, body language, and press conferences were dissected endlessly. Media pundits questioned their emotions, their behavior, even the tone of their voices. The court of public opinion was in full session, and in that court, many had already decided the Ramseys were guilty. Tabloids ran wild. From claims that Patsy wrote the ransom note to speculation about Burke's involvement, every theory found its way to a headline. The pressure created by the media frenzy influenced the investigators themselves. Several former law enforcement officials later admitted they felt pushed to deliver results quickly to satisfy the public and press. Television networks aired hour-long specials and reenactments. True crime magazines published cover stories that blurred the line between journalism and entertainment. In the absence of arrests or clear answers, theories filled the void. For many viewers, the media coverage became the case. The internet, still in its early stages in the late 1990s, also played a role. Online forums became hotbeds for armchair detectives. People posted theories, dissected timelines, and accused everyone from the Ramseys to complete strangers. This virtual detective work foreshadowed a shift in true crime media that would explode in the decades to come. Some journalists, however, used their platforms to advocate for more responsible reporting. A few investigative pieces criticized the Boulder Police Department's handling of the case, while others highlighted the lack of concrete evidence against the family. But these were often drowned out by louder, more scandal-driven voices. The media circus reached its peak with the 2006 arrest of John Mark Carr. The global press descended on his story with the same fervor they had shown a decade earlier, only for it to fizzle out once again. The press, it seemed, was more interested in the drama than the truth. In later years, documentaries and streaming specials revisited the case with a more balanced tone. Advances in forensic science and a public more aware of media bias allowed for a re-examination of the facts. Still, the impact of those early years remained. Many believe that media interference not only shaped public perception but may have compromised the case's outcome. The JonBenét Ramsey case is now a blueprint for how media attention can both illuminate and obscure the truth. It's a story about justice, but also about storytelling, perception, and the dangerous power of a narrative repeated too often without proof. Nearly 3 decades later, the question remains: who killed JonBenét Ramsey? No definitive answers have emerged. No one has been charged. But her memory, frozen in time and broadcast to the world, continues to haunt a nation still searching for justice.